This is like the television was invented 2 years ago. So, and television was invented 2 years ago, and there's a bunch of money for new TV ads. So there's a lot of money this year in super PACs, but they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to reach people. They don't know how to most effectively use money as outside money. They're just making it up as they go along. And one signal of that is most disproportionate super PAC money is coming from Texas, which is, it sounds wrong, but what I mean is that it's from Rove's friends so far. It's not from Wall Street. And I am much more concerned about long-term, about systemic use of money in politics, outside money, super PAC money by Wall Street and other industry interests than I am about rich eccentrics. Not that I like the rich eccentrics, but then far more concerning is really systemic use. As the Supreme Court in 1871 said, if the great corporations of our day were to hire adventurers to make market of themselves, every right-minded person would denounce it as immoral. A second problem, and this actually relates very closely to Arendt, did I say it right? Is that it takes away from the public the most difficult political questions. So, tell me if I'm saying this wrong, Roger, but I think of Arendt as saying politics is what happens when people come together and say, what should we do? And the question of what should we do is a really, really hard one, and the Supreme Court has kicked it out of some of our most difficult questions. We live in an era where information is power. In this country in particular, data, ownership of data and management of information is power. So if you would tie ownership and management of information as power plus information has to be free no matter what together, you have power is going to be free no matter what. We don't have any way of managing Google or Facebook or the data controlled by various other large corporate powers. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd rather have it publicly than have it be cut off and kicked out of discussion by the Supreme Court. So I want to end by talking about what I think is one of the real challenges to the liberal political vision, which is lobbying. So 1871, the Supreme Court says that it cannot be enforced against the public policy of the United States. I don't know what the right answer is there, but I think it is a challenge because on the one hand, it is incredibly important to be able to petition government, incredibly important for groups of people to come together and organize and petition, perhaps with a paid agent. On the other hand, a lobbyist's job is to take money and be an alchemist and turn that money into power. And as lobbyists, they do it through the medium of information and reason, but turning money into reason is actually a very scary thing for a political society. I mean, the old folks would call it sophistry. By old, I mean thousands of years old. That there's something very dangerous about living in a society where people can be paid and can be paid to turn that money into information which itself is transported into power. And what that means, so 1871 case absolutely overruled, lobbying is absolutely protected, and because the Supreme Court has taken it out, we don't have an active scholarly discussion about lobbying. People don't talk about lobbying too much. The left and the right both sort of shut their eyes about it. The left, because if you say I might want to limit lobbying, that sounds like you're stepping on the First Amendment. And so, although there's some discussion of how horrible it is, we don't have an active public discussion about how we think lobbying should work and how it shouldn't work. That's the kind of discussion I think we should have, and the Supreme Court has taken out of the public's hands. I guess the one last thing I want to say about that is that it's somewhat ironic that the First Amendment is ended up being used to shut down effectively some questions that I think we should be having publicly. So what should we do? What most of my scholarship is around sort of building a different vision of what the Constitution is and what the Constitution is for. I think that if you look at both the founding era and up through the 1920s, you'll see a story of the Constitution being for representative government more than for free speech. I think we should return to that. And that the core foundation of that is an anxiety, a very sort of dark vision of concentrated power always threatening self-government. And so then the job of us as citizens, the job of the court, is to help in that battle so that there's self-government can be possible. And then the second thing we should do is to challenge the orthodoxy, be willing to show some skepticism towards the First Amendment, and understand the broader tradition it came out of and understand ways that we might possibly limit it. At this point, I think I'd like to open up for questions, discussion. Thanks.
We have some time for questions. Other questions?
You make it seem as if the kind of conversation in the Supreme Court around the First Amendment has shut down the question of lobbying, the idea that we can question whether or not lobbying is good for our society. But I'm curious, was there a time before the First Amendment was used to such extent in these decisions that the question of lobbying was addressed by campaigns in a more kind of public sense? Or is it simply a kind of natural coming together that lobbying has become a larger problem as we have more money? And it just so happens that the Supreme Court has been using the First Amendment and used that to shut down lobbying at the time when we had that conversation.
So there was a lot of discussion about lobbying in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, and actually prior to the First Amendment, you saw some courts starting to enforce contracts to lobby, even without using the First Amendment as the reason. But it was because there was a greater move towards enforcing contracts instead of using public policy to say.
But I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it was a reaction to that conversation that the Supreme Court shut down conversations about lobbying because the judges kind of had a personal stake in the fact that this conversation should be shut down and not so much the language of the First Amendment that enabled it, but was used as an excuse?
Yeah, I don't actually think so much. I mean, there's some just very contemporary justices that I am a little bit cynical about. But I actually have argued that I think one of the problems with the current Supreme Court is that there's too many academics on it. And people with no political experience. Because what you see is people with any political experience are far more sympathetic to the problems with lobbying and campaign finance than people without it. Because if you don't have any political experience, then you can think about it really abstractly. We have never had a court with this little political experience. And 1976 was the first year where a majority, I'm not sure, it was around the first year where a majority of the judges didn't have political experience, 1976 being the year Buckley versus Vallejo was decided. So I think some of it is that academics are more drawn to free speech arguments. And appellate judges are more drawn to free speech arguments. It's what we do. We like having our expression. We value personally, we have an emotional relationship to expression. Where if somebody like Taft has lived in the political world, they're far more likely to say, yeah, I like my free expression, but I don't want to have a wink and nod conversation with Goldman Sachs where they say, just saying, we don't like the financial transaction tax. Nothing more. And if you know Goldman's money, you know that you're far more likely to understand the way in which money works in politics. I'm not actually terribly cynical about the motives of the Supreme Court, except maybe Justice Roberts. And then, they're all emotional. They're all emotional, weird people. Like Kennedy. Oh God. I think Kennedy, after Citizens United, my sense is that Kennedy moved right after Citizens United because he didn't like all the criticism. So some people are like, you're going to criticize me? Well, I'm even more right than I thought I was. And they're just people. I guess that's all I would say, is that they're just people. The other thing is, if they've worked in the academy, as I do now, legal academy, tends to be pretty elite. People tend to come from corporate law firms. They themselves bring their own ideological background. So it's more soft. takeover of the mind, then I'm going to get something out of it. Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's why.
Say you had to re-argue, you would give the opportunity to re-argue Citizens United
Yes.
tomorrow in court. I mean, I have a couple questions. Would you strategically think, well, I have to bring in the First Amendment? If you didn't, how would you argue it? And if you did, how would you argue that?
It's funny you asked. No, I wrote this article that was sort of directly related to that. I would argue first, I would absolutely use the First Amendment because you can't avoid it. So that's there. But separately, that there's another incredibly strong American political tradition that goes back to the founding, which is concerned with corruption. Corruption was mentioned more often than any other concern during the Constitutional Convention. Hamilton said, when he was later asked what was the convention about, he said, well, we'd put every practicable obstacle we could to corruption. So that first I would try to identify with a separate tradition, and then the second thing I would do, which relates to your question, is I try to make it as concrete as possible. So then future Justice Kagan argued the Citizens United decision, Elena Kagan, and I don't think she did a very good job. Do I have to record all this? I guess so. And part of it is because it was so abstract. So that if you get into this happens in my classes, if you just talk about free speech in the abstract, free speech wins. But if you say, okay, you're a Congress member, Goldman Sachs says, I don't like the financial transaction tax. Let's talk about the federal bribery laws that cover it. It turns out they don't. Like, let's talk practically about what every other protection is. There aren't any. You, by the way, Supreme Court, have knocked down and limited federal bribery statutes as well. So don't have a fantasy that there's some white knight prosecutor out there who's going to be able to go get Goldman Sachs for this, just saying I don't like financial transaction tax. So really try to make it real for them what politics is, because I actually think they're really naive. I think that they believe that politics feels like a market square, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm a little confused. I read Citizens United a little differently. Don't you think there's two problems to the case? There's bad law, which is what Scalia was saying, that there's a 30-day arbitrary rule, which he struck down. He said you can't limit speech in this 30-day period. And in a sense, he's looking at the equal protection clause. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can argue free speech, but how can you argue a bad law?
So, broadly put, the question is, how do you stop, I'll just rephrase it, how do you stop bribery? Given that, and by bribery you mean that there's some kind of threat or promise of spending money in exchange for some policy decision of public officials. You wouldn't put it that way?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay, so I'll get back to it and I'll see if I answer your question. So what Congress did is we can either do a really vague law that says we're going to look case by case, but then gives enormous discretion to prosecutors, or we're going to do a bright line rule. And the bright line rule says 30 days. And with 30 days, we have the advantage of not giving enormous discretion to prosecutors, having everybody know exactly what the law is, exactly what the law isn't, and if they follow this law, it's fine. If they don't follow this law, it's fine. The reason I put it in that context is that bribery laws are really hard. Citizens United decided the same year as Skilling, the Enron case, where the Supreme Court struck down a bribery law for vagueness. So on the one hand, they say you can't have it vague. On the other hand, they say you can't have it bright line. So that's the context I would put it in. I do think there are other very real hard arguments in Citizens United. I can tell you what I think Kennedy's best argument is, if you're curious.
Sure.
It's so good, and he does it so badly, but if he did it well, it's somewhat devastating. It's that he says, I don't know the difference between Ford Motor Company and the New York Times. I don't. They're both corporations. And a lot of times, Ford Motor Company owns the New York Times, right? And a lot of times, Ford Motor Company has its own press. Go to Exxon's webpage right now. It has news. So if I can't tell the difference between the New York Times and the Ford Motor Company, and you let me outlaw corporate independent speech, that means that you can outlaw the New York Times too. And until you tell me how to tell the difference between press and not press, I don't want to go down that road. I think that's a devastating argument.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
Because I actually think it is a devastating argument, and I don't think you need to oppose it. Right? I mean, there's a different, so much of the Citizens United discussion has gone about corporations.
Yeah.
Right? Corporations, or why should corporations have free speech? I mean, I forget the exact case, but there was that Massachusetts case that allowed unions, right, to make arguments.
Citizens for life, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the argument there was, okay, there's individual union members, but unions are part of our political sphere,
Right.
and they should have a voice. And you can make the same very good argument for corporations. But your argument against Citizens United, as I understood it, was not about, what I liked about it from when I read it, was forget the corporation issue.
Yeah.
What it's really about is there was this value that from the founding up to the 19 whatever, in which whether it's corporations or individuals, little Mr. Child sitting there, Mr. Old Man, right?
Yeah.
You can't, that that the fundamental value protecting freedom in this country was anti-corruption.
Yeah.
And that we've shifted our political theory from saying we need to keep it non-corrupt political sphere to having a democracy, to having a free speech for individuals. And so then you can accept Kennedy's argument and say that the real argument is not about corporations or individuals, it's about the loss of the anti-corruption aspect. And that,
I think that's right. And also, I don't think, in these difficult questions, I don't think the court should decide.
can you just, you did a little of it, can you do a little bit more? I mean, bring out the anti-corruption argument. I mean, let's say you were going to take Joe's question and make your argument.
Right.
What is the political theory behind the anti-corruption argument?
That people should not use public office for private gain. And public office includes being a citizen. So when you are acting as a citizen, you should not use it for private gain. And this is the death of republic. It's the end of Rome, which has very much influenced the founders. They're very concerned about what they saw in Britain, which is that people were going into office to make money for themselves, and had a very strong political culture that didn't have the civic culture that the United States did. And so then the Constitution includes a whole suite of protections against this. When they talked about election, they talked about corruptions. When they talked about residency, 7-year residency requirement, they talked about corruption. When they talked about, Akhil Amar has argued that when they talked about not allowing people to be congressmen until a certain age, we don't have a textual source for this, but that was an anti-corruption provision because you didn't want dynasties, 21-year-old sons, to be able to come in. There's a provision in the Constitution, the snuff box, when we mentioned the snuff box, that says you may not, officers of the United States may not accept a gift of any kind whatever from a foreign prince or a head of state, absolutely because of fears of corruption and sort of change dependencies. The Electoral College was in part, came back as a fear of corruption because at the time it took so long to travel from state to state that Madison said it's going to be too hard to organize buying all the votes in the presidency if you have different states having their own electoral college system. And, no, not the electoral college, the fact that it's all held on one day. Because why you can have elections held on lots of different days, but all on one day means it's going to be too hard to organize. The veto, they talked endlessly about the veto power as an anti-corruption principle because they were worried that the president would buy up the veto plus one votes in the Senate, because they wanted to make sure the veto was small enough that the president couldn't buy the veto plus one votes. So it was just a constant theme. Those are the kinds of arguments that I made, and it persisted for 150 years. So there's some people who say, yeah, that's what they did, but they were these weird idealists, and that isn't workable. But actually, we went 150 years with this idea that if a constitution's for anything, it's for limiting the twin threats. There are two threats to a country: violence and corruption. Outer threat, inner threat. Everybody accepted this twin threat theory up until the 30s and 40s.
Yeah. So With the, because we're kind of looking back in
Yeah.
development, with the Sedition Act, and then the Espionage Act,
Yes.
and this development of free speech, and then McCarthyism,
Yes.
and then, symbolic expression.
Yeah.
We turn away, we keep making these turns with free speech, and now with Citizens United.
Yeah.
What do you think will be next? Do you think, the development, because I don't want to say, do you think we're going to rule down Citizens United and change everything, because it doesn't seem like you think that.
Well, because where we're going to be ends up depending an enormous amount on the justices and not on the country. But it does actually end up mattering depending on who the academics are who move up and what
Do
they
you think
think.
we'll stick down this road?
Do you think what?
Do you think we'll stay down this road?
Well, I think we're on it right now.
Yeah.
The two district courts recently struck down provisions that have been fairly long-standing that prohibited lobbyists from had revolving door statutes that prohibited based on Citizens United. The other one was prohibited lobbyists from giving money to campaigns. So at least when they're reading the tea leaves, they're saying we're going farther down that road. The same group that argued that pushed Citizens United is pushing for against disclosure, saying that it is a violation of your First Amendment rights to have campaign contributions disclosed. All this can change with a different court, but also with a different public ideology. I do think the public ideology seeps in. And, I want to retain a free speech value, but not...
Okay.
What we saw with... I'm glad you mentioned McCarthyism, is that, a colleague of mine says we're always fighting the last battle, and we're fighting McCarthyism when that isn't the problem in contemporary society. Or you may think it is.
Well, not in the same extent.
Not the same, yeah.
Well, just I'll push on that.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the free speech right that protects against this McCarthyism and the free speech right as it's expressed by Citizens United and Kennedy that says political speech can't be regulated and costs? How do you articulate the difference?
Well, within the context of the court, I would argue this way, which is that when it's content-based, and that's tricky, but when it's based on a particular point of view, then it's extremely dangerous. When it's not based on a particular point of view, then sometimes it can be dangerous, like the Sedition Acts. You could say those aren't a point of view act, or they are, and I still think they're a point of view. Whereas in the, now Kennedy clearly thinks in Citizens United, he thinks that the people who pass campaign finance have a point of view, and their point of view is anti-corporate. And that there is he doesn't rest on it, but he clearly thinks there's a content. The idea is that the most critically looked upon laws are laws that say, thou shalt not be anti-abortion, thou shalt not be pro-abortion. The laws that say what the content of what you're saying is criminalized as opposed to the fact of some kind of speech. But I think that's where I would draw the line, and I would have a little more trust that courts can work that out.
Yeah, you mentioned something about kind of reviving this idea of representational government, or you said something about it, but if the concept of speech has changed so much to the point where money is now speech, and if you donate money to like a terrorist organization, money is now material aid, is now speech, you can draw this line. How do you, don't you feel that the nature of representation itself has kind of been changed in a way that reviving it is not as simple as it may sound? Or what do you think post-Citizens United is the nature of representation in politics? And is there some kind of new representation you would want to go for?
You had brought up so many interesting things, including the material aid stuff. It's really interesting, because one way to think about it is that there's a view of the First Amendment, which is the First Amendment is used to deregulate. It's used as an unregulating tool, except in areas of terrorism, where we have maybe a different First Amendment, and that's a little logically inconsistent. But what I care about, I don't know this answer is, what I care about is that people have power to answer questions in their lives like, how should we live? And they have it in some meaningful sense. And so the representation I care about is that is not representation for its own sake, but representation for power. And I guess I wish the court talked more about power, not just representation, which is... but I don't know that I entirely understand your question. I mean...
Well, it just seems that, yeah, it's a very jumbled question, and it's kind of vague in my mind, but it seems like part of the problem, especially because, like Kennedy's argument, you can't tell the difference between New York Times as a corporation and Ford as a corporation, even though one is producing information. And it seems like information is exactly what a political representative wants to represent, you know, the speech or the information or whatever from their constituency. But if we're in a place where now what would be represented or channeled through representatives is something that has morphed or become some other thing, then...
Maybe we should have a different name for it. That's interesting. So, like, a classic example would be in financial reform. I keep mentioning this. Have any of you heard of the financial transactions tax? So it's a tax on, you know, like you get a tax when you buy toothpaste, a tax on financial transactions. When polled, 73% of the country likes it. These are crazy numbers. As a union friend of mine said, these are numbers so high, it doesn't matter how you message it, which is very unusual for Washington. Almost nobody's proposing it. It would make political sense in tight districts. Romney should be proposing it. But because of fear of the financial industry, it's outside of the scope. So there's not representation in that area. Is that what you're talking about? Where they're not actually representing the population?
Yeah, I guess so.
And should we stop calling it representation if it's not?
Yeah, it's partially that language is kind of something that I think has been confusing. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts on whether it's still talk about representation and speech in the same.
So in world history, we're doing pretty well. You know, I tend to think that we tend towards oligarchy in political society. We don't quite have one yet. We're moving towards it. And the reason I care so deeply about action now is I feel like we still have a civic culture. And representation is still psychologically possible for those of us who are part of that tradition. And so I want to grab onto that and do something about it. But we're in tricky days.
Thanks a lot for your talk. I wanted to hear more about the distinction you were just making before Jan's question about not wanting to police the content of the speech. And I wonder how that can work. And I don't know, I'm thinking about the Canadian hate speech laws. We call it hate speech, and there's a content but also a function involved.
Right.
So here in the U.S., when what I would, as Canadian, would call hate speech happens, it's no, that's not hate speech. It's my exercise of my right to free speech.
Right.
Right. So it's said to be a practice rather than a harmful content. I don't know if that's the kind of distinction you're getting at, but it seems to me counterintuitive that after what you've told us now,
that I would still be willing to police content,
or that that you don't
we're not police
that
content.
you don't think content can be policed. And I want to know what content.
Oh, it's such a great question because this is a fun talk for me because I haven't really given it before, and to really try to think out loud about how far I want to go on the First Amendment. I have some skepticism about the First Amendment, but how far to go. And when Canada and Europe, it doesn't look so bad. I basically have a view that the Supreme Court should not get involved that often. That there are times, like with segregation, where the Supreme Court absolutely should get involved. But it should be pretty rare, as opposed to a regular. I'd always rather have the stupid, crazy public decide things, almost always, than the elite, Harvard-educated group of 7, group of 9, group of 5 often. So the question is, I pose it as, when should there be an exception for that? When should we say that we don't fundamentally trust the public? I fundamentally trust the public more than the group of 9 for money and politics questions. I don't trust them necessarily on race. Maybe that will change, but right now. And when you look at the Sedition Acts, I have this reaction. Say, I don't trust the public of 1917 on the Anti-Sedition Act. I think those acts are crazy. So finding the line is really difficult, but I don't think, I think shrinking way back would be okay, because I look at Europe and I look at Canada, neither of which have a First Amendment. There's no First Amendment tradition in those countries, in those cultures as well. I don't feel like people who wanted to oppose the war are muzzled, or who have different political views are muzzled. So what I was using was very classic, showing how socialized I've been, a very classic model, which is content speech versus non-content speech. But I think it's a good question.